So one of the things I admired most about my husband is that he runs a big Facebook page. To us, that's considered big. It's a little over 8,500 people who have exposure to his work and his writing. And one of the things he recently posted was a picture of a Butch Cassidy home in Circleville, or a Parker family home, and a cabin where Butch was truly born, which is just outside of Beaver on North Creek. So I'm going to just let him tell the story from here. And it also includes another one of his grandfathers who owned a cabin in Circleville, and the whole story about the Circleville Ranch.
Well, for many years now, the people of Beaver have claimed that Butch was born in Beaver. And they list his grandparents' home as his birthplace. And while in fact he was born in a cabin on his father's ranch on North Creek, some 8 or 10 miles north of Beaver. He was born on Friday the 13th of 1866 in the middle of the Black Hawk War. And on the night he was born, the ranch cabin, the Parker family ranch, all of the local ranchers had gathered there and pulled their livestock into a corral to keep the Indians from driving them off. And the Indians attacked them at night and trying to steal the cattle. And so a gunfight had ensued on the night that Butch was born in the cabin. And I've always maintained that Butch was born with the sound of gunfire in his ears. But the story of his being born in Beaver is simply not true. The cabin, or the old house that they claim, was not even standing when Butch was born. It was built in later years and added to. And in 1874, Maximilian Parker, Butch's father, traded his North Creek ranch for a ranch in Circle Valley. And that ranch had belonged to my great-grandfather, Charles Van Vliet. The Van Vliets had come up from Kanab in a wagon train during the Black Hawk War. And when they reached Circle Valley, their wagon train was attacked by Indians. And my grandfather's, great-grandfather's youngest son, who was 7 years old, was killed by the Indians in the wagon seat. And so after the battle, the Indians had been driven off. My great-grandfather decided that he was going to ranch at that location, and he built a cabin there. And his son-in-law, my great-grandfather, Gardner Potter, helped him erect the cabin. The Potters owned a shingle mill in Manti, and he brought shingles down and they shingled the roof and built a cabin. And they built the cabin over the gravesite of my 7-year-old great uncle, and then put the fire stove on top of it to hide it so the Indians wouldn't desecrate the grave. But in 1874, they traded that cabin to the Parkers, and they made a switch. The Parkers left North Creek and came to Circleville, and the Van Vliets left Circleville and went to North Creek, and they just traded ranches. And so Butch was born in North Creek, but he was raised mostly as a boy in Circleville. And so this story of his helping his mother plant the trees, the Mormon poplars and such, is all true. They built up the ranch. And For many years, a lot of people have said that the ranch actually belonged to Jim Marshall, another rancher character in that area. Well, Jim Marshall later moved up to Browns Park, and the Marshall Ranch became a hangout for the rustlers in the region, and it was adjoining the old Parker Ranch in Circleville. And so the Marshall Ranch was not the original Parker family ranch. It was one that they utilized to graze their cattle, and Butch utilized it to raise a lot of stolen horses. And so my family has had dealings with both cabins, and there was never any doubt in our family of who built it. I in fact have the original deeds from the cabin in North Creek proving it's the trade and the land that they built up there.
And Lulu Parker Benson, Butch's sister, told you a story about a family member being buried at the Circleville Ranch?
Yes, Lula was a dear friend for many, many years. And one day when I came to visit her, she was laughing. And I asked her what was so funny, and she said, well, every year we bring people over with a backhoe from Circleville to come in and clean our canal, which runs adjacent to our cabin. And she says this last spring, she said, I had him come over to do it, and I told him there's a grave over there, so please don't disturb that area there. And she said the next day, when she went into town, the whole town was buzzing that now they knew where Butch was buried. He's buried on the ranch in Circleville. And in fact, it turned out to be their family dog.
So when Kerry was young, he had made a pledge to himself that he wanted to stand at the grave of Butch Cassidy, Harry Longabaugh, the Sundance Kid, and Etta Place. And he's successfully done 2 of those with Butch, and Harry Longabaugh, aka Hiram Beebe, was the name that he passed away under. And with Etta, he has not been able to successfully stand at her grave. But we do think that he had an opportunity of perhaps meeting her when he was in Hollywood at that time, that he was the script boy for John Wayne. You want to take it over?
Yeah. A very unusual incident. I can't prove anything by it, but I rented an apartment in Hollywood. And I had to pay my rent to an old gentleman who lived in the front apartment. And I went into his apartment each time to pay my rent to him. And above his fireplace, he had a picture of Butch, Sundance, and Etta hanging above his fireplace. And I asked him about it because I had come from the country where they belonged, and he wouldn't talk about it. He absolutely forbade me to even ask about it. So I left it alone, still very curious. And then one day he had an elderly lady come to stay with him for a few days. And she was a very petite lady. She wore white gloves almost all the time. And there was a small park just next to our apartment. And I was sitting out there on the bench one day, and she came out and sat down to the side of me. She said, I understand that you're from the Browns Park country. And I said, yes, I grew up, was raised there. And she asked me about a few names that I was familiar with, and wanted to know if I had known what had happened to them. And I mentioned my grandfather, Willard Schofield. And she says, I knew your granddad. He used to tend bar at the old honky-tonk saloon, the Bucket of Blood saloon, they called it. at Linwood, Utah. And I said, yes, but not many people knew that. And she said, well, I knew him well. And so we started talking, and she started asking questions about all the people that Etta had known. And she was interested in Charlie Sparks from Browns Park, and a number of others. And we sat and talked for hours about the different people from up there. And I was never able to prove anything, but I have always believed that it was Etta Place. She was the right age. She certainly had the right knowledge. And the man she was staying with was familiar with Butch, Sundance, and Etta. So it remains a mystery.
Yeah, it's one of our regrets that he's not been able to stand at her gravesite. We have a kind of a clue, an idea of possibly where she's buried and under what name she was buried. He was successful in hunting her down in terms of her various aliases. I think for me, one of the things that when I first met Kerry was I was so upset that he had broken the mystery of the Sundance Kid, and that he had died under the name Hiram Beebe, and is buried actually up here at the Salt Lake Cemetery. And others have taken credit from that and from him and his discovery, and that really, it just kind of is a little upsetting, because he's devoted his whole life without any expectation of grandeur or fame or tons of money, just to pursue these outlaws and to tell their side of the story. And it's been a magnificent run with him. He's pretty incredible. So we published a few books. One of them, being more notable, is